to fully grasp the sheer magnitude of the Victorian Christmas Revolution and the cultural seismic shift it represented, one must first embark on a harrowing, detailed, and atmospheric journey back through the desolate, monochromatic, and spiritually austere winter landscape of the preceding centuries, where the festive season was unrecognizable compared to the commercial juggernaut and joyous, light-filled celebration we cherish today. For generations prior to the 19th century, the ghost of the stringent 17th century Puritan band still cast a long, gray, and oppressive shadow over British culture, effectively suppressing the exuberant, raucous, and often chaotic medieval traditions that had once defined the winter solstice in the age of the Tudors and Stuarts, such as the Lord of Misrule and the Mummers plays. In the turbulent year of 1644, and more formally in the draconian legislation of 1647, the Long Parliament, operating under the austere, theology-driven, and iron-fisted influence of Oliver Cromwell and his Puritan zealots, had legally abolished the celebration of Christmas, condemning it as a pagan festival, rife with carnal excess, drunkenness, gluttony, and superstitious popery that distracted the faithful from true, sober worship.
If you're ready for the next chapter of history, subscribe to the History Profile. Now, let's continue.
They viewed the specific date of December 25th as a human invention, with no biblical basis, a residue of the Roman Saturnalia, and thus, they went so far as to order shops to remain forcefully open and churches to remain firmly locked and barred on Christmas Day to prevent any unauthorized merriment or liturgical observance. The backlash was severe. In Canterbury, the famous plum pudding riots erupted in 1647 when the mayor tried to ban the festive dish, leading to a rebellion where citizens seized control of the city gates under the slogan, "No popery but limited monarchy and a free Christmas," proving that the hunger for celebration was deep-seated. The famous Directory for Public Worship explicitly stated that the day should be spent in fasting, humility, and silent contemplation, rather than feasting, effectively criminalizing the consumption of traditional mince pies, which were seen as idolatrous due to their spices representing the gifts of the Magi plum porridge and the burning of the Yule log, although the monarchy was eventually restored in 1660. Bringing back King Charles II and a degree of social relaxation, the deep cultural damage to the holiday had been done. For the better part of 2 centuries, Christmas remained a muted, minor religious observance, largely devoid of the magical iconography, gift-giving rituals, and sparkling decorations we now consider essential to the season. In the Georgian era that immediately preceded Victoria's reign, a Christmas tree was a concept entirely alien to the general British public, a foreign obscurity whispering in the deep German forests of the continent, while the English winter was marked only by the simple ancient custom of bringing in greenery like holly, ilex, aquifolium, ivy, and mistletoe to ward off spirits, a practice dating back to the Druids, yet completely lacking the focal point of a glowing, decorated evergreen to gather the family around. The season was characterized by adult feasting, heavy drinking in taverns, and formal social calls among the gentry rather than domestic magic or childhood wonder, leaving a profound vacuum in the cultural imagination that was waiting to be filled by a new era of romanticism, family values, and a royal love story that would change the world forever. Before we continue unraveling the fascinating hidden history behind our most beloved holiday traditions and the royal romance that reshaped the world's winter festivities, please take a brief but crucial moment to support our channel and help us keep history alive. If you enjoy these deep dives into the past and want to see more high-quality, meticulously researched documentaries like this one, please hit the like button right now. It significantly helps the YouTube algorithm find new history lovers like yourself and allows us to compete with larger networks. Do you forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss an upload or a new discovery. And please share this video with friends, family, or anyone who loves history as much as you do. Posting this on your social media or sending it to a group chat makes a massive difference. Your engagement is absolutely vital in helping us continue our mission of bringing the past to life, one story at a time. And we truly appreciate every single interaction, comment, and share from our dedicated community of history enthusiasts who make this work possible. The seeds of the Christmas tree tradition were not sown solely by Prince Albert, as is often claimed in simplified historical narratives, but were actually planted in the fertile, somewhat lonely soil of Queen Victoria's own isolated and often melancholy childhood. Growing up under the suffocating Kensington system, a strict, paranoid, and controlling set of rules designed by her mother, the Duchess of Kent, and the ambitious, manipulative controller, Sir John Conroy, to render her dependent and isolate her from the royal court and the influence of the king, the young Princess Victoria's life was largely devoid of the warmth, frivolity, and playmates that characterized the childhoods of her peers. She slept in her mother's room every single night until the day she became queen, was never allowed to walk downstairs without holding a governess's hand, and was kept away from the wicked influence of her paternal uncles. The psychological toll of this isolation was immense. There is a harrowing story from 1835 when Victoria, then 16, fell dangerously ill with typhoid fever at Ramsgate and Conroy, and her mother used her weakened state to badger her relentlessly to sign a document appointing Conroy as her private secretary, effectively handing him power. Victoria, frail and feverish, refused with a stubbornness that foreshadowed her reign, but the trauma of that betrayal, where her own family used her vulnerability against her, left a scar that made her yearn desperately for a safe, loving domestic environment. However, amidst the gloom, the family feuds, and the rigid protocols of Kensington Palace, she clung to a singular, radiant memory provided by her grandmother, Queen Charlotte, the German wife of George III, who had maintained her own cultural customs from Mecklenburg-Strelitz. It was Queen Charlotte who in the year 1800 had held a lavish party for the children of the wealthy families of Windsor and introduced a decorated yew branch, not the full floor-standing fir we know today, but a potted bough laden with sweetmeats, raisins, and almonds. For the young Victoria recorded in her detailed journals as a 13-year-old on Christmas Eve in 1832, the sight of 2 trees at Kensington Palace decorated with lights and sugar ornaments provided a rare and dazzling glimpse of joy in an otherwise gray existence. This early exposure created a latent emotional connection to the German custom, a dormant spark of nostalgia for a happier, brighter world that she would eventually seek to recreate for her own children, laying the emotional and psychological groundwork for the full-scale adoption of the tradition a decade later when she finally had a family, her own, to nurture and protect from the coldness she had experienced. While Victoria was safeguarding these fragile memories in England, across the Channel in the Duchy of Saxe-Coburg-Saalfeld, the young Prince Albert was spending his formative years immersed in the rich, mystical, and centuries-old folklore of the Tannenbaum. For Albert, the Christmas tree was not merely a decorative novelty or a passing fancy, but the central, beating heart of the winter solstice, deeply entwined with the German soul and the Lutheran tradition which legendarily ascribed the first lighted tree to Martin Luther himself, who was said to be inspired by the starlight twinkling amidst the evergreens during a walk home through the forest. In the dense snow-covered forests of Thuringia, often called the Green Heart of Germany, the evergreen stood as a powerful symbol of eternal life amidst the death of winter. And the German celebration of Weihnachten was an intensely emotional sensory experience involving the smell of pine, the flickering of real wax candles, the warmth of the hearth. Albert's childhood letters and journals reveal a man who was deeply sentimental and spiritually connected to these rituals. He would often write to his father describing the paradise of the decorated trees at the Rosenau Palace, recalling the specific placement of the candles and the joy of the servants. For him, the tree represented the sanctity of the family unit, a concept known as Gemütlichkeit, a specific German untranslatability denoting warmth, friendliness, belonging, and good cheer. He grew up believing that the tree was the altar upon which family bonds were renewed and celebrated. A sharp contrast to the cold, formal, and often fractured domestic life of the British aristocracy he was destined to join. This profound cultural attachment meant that when he eventually left Coburg to marry Victoria, he carried the spiritual blueprint of the Christmas tree with him, viewing it not just as a decoration, but as an essential component of a life well lived and a necessary vessel for domestic happiness. A piece of his homeland that he could anchor in a foreign land to stave off the pangs of homesickness and preserve his own identity against the stifling English court. The union of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert in 1840 was more than a political alliance or a dynastic arrangement. It was a passionate collision of hearts and minds that would fundamentally reshape the cultural fabric of an entire nation, and eventually the globe. When Albert arrived in England to assume his role as Prince Consort, he found the British royal household to be stiff, archaic, poorly managed, and lacking the intellectual and emotional depth he prized and was accustomed to in the university towns of Germany. He was a man of immense capability, intellect, and artistic sensibility who initially struggled with the constraints of his position, where he was often viewed by the political establishment as a foreigner with no real power, the Coburg lad, and by the public with suspicion and xenophobia. There were even times when he was hissed at in the streets of London during the early years of the marriage, a stinging rejection. That drove him to find solace within the palace walls, determined to establish his own sphere of influence and to infuse the cold, drafty corridors of Buckingham Palace and Windsor Castle with the domestic warmth of his homeland. Albert turned his energies toward the management of the royal household and the upbringing of their growing brood of children. He sought to create a model family life that balanced royal duty with genuine affection, intellectual curiosity, and moral fortitude. The Christmas traditions of his youth became the perfect vehicle for this cultural transplantation. By introducing the German way of celebrating, he was not just decorating a room but asserting his identity and values within the marriage, softening the rigid British protocol with the sentimental, family-focused ethos of German Romanticism and creating a shared sanctuary for him and Victoria, where they could be husband and wife rather than just queen and consort, a private realm governed by love rather than duty. The pivotal moment in this horticultural and cultural history occurred in December 1841, a time when Prince Albert, suffering from a bout of acute homesickness for the white winters and snow-covered hills of Coburg, decided to import spruce trees directly from Germany to Windsor Castle. This was the first Christmas following the birth of their firstborn son, Albert Edward Bertie, the future King Edward VII, and the Prince Consort was determined to recreate the magical, wonder-filled atmosphere of his own youth for his heir, ensuring the child would grow up with the same cherished memories. He did not merely supervise the placement of the trees from a distance. He was intimately and physically involved in the process, viewing the installation of the evergreen as a fatherly duty and a sacred ritual of the season, often engaging in the physical labor of hanging the higher ornaments himself to ensure they caught the light perfectly. The arrival of these trees at Windsor marked a definitive departure from the previous English custom of simple bows, holly, and kissing balls. By bringing entire trees indoors, specifically the Norway spruce Picea abies, Albert established a new undeniable focal point for the royal family's winter celebrations, transforming the castle's private quarters from a state residence into a fragrant, glittering wonderland that served as a sanctuary from the immense pressures of the crown. This act anchored their family life, creating a private tradition that would soon ripple outwards to become a public obsession, forever altering how the British people experienced the month of December and introducing the concept of the family Christmas that we recognize today. It is a common modern misconception to picture these early royal Christmas trees as the towering, floor-to-ceiling giants we see in department stores or public squares today. In reality, the Victorian royal tradition was far more intimate, precarious, and arguably more beautiful. The trees instituted by Prince Albert were typically placed atop tables covered in fine white damask, elevating the spectacle to eye level and turning the tree into a glowing, altar-like centerpiece for the exchange of gifts. These tabletop trees were lavishly decorated with a level of opulence that reflected the wealth of the empire but retained a homemade, crafted charm. They were adorned with real wax candles, which were wired onto the branches with extreme care, and lit only for short periods due to the immense fire risk they posed to the dry needles. The branches groaned under the weight of edible treats, gingerbread, marzipan, crystallized fruits, and sugar plums, which were actually hard candies containing a seed like coriander or caraway coated in layers of melted sugar over several days, as well as small gifts, ribbons, and paper cornucopias filled with sweets. The aesthetic was one of abundance and light, with the flickering flames of the expensive beeswax candles reflecting off the gilded ornaments and the wide eyes of the royal children. This tabletop presentation fundamentally dictated the size and shape of the tree, requiring a symmetry and density that would allow it to balance safely while laden with heavy decorations, creating a jeweled shrine rather than a mere piece of vegetation, and centering the holiday on this glowing pyramid of light that seemed to defy the darkness of the British winter. While the royal family enjoyed this custom in private for several years as their own special ritual, the seismic shift in public consciousness occurred in December 1848, when the Illustrated London News, the world's first illustrated weekly newspaper and a titan of Victorian media influence, published a detailed woodcut engraving of the royal family at Windsor. This image was revolutionary not just for its depiction of the Christmas tree, but for its intimate, humanizing portrayal of the monarchy itself. The engraving showed Queen Victoria, Prince Albert, and their young children standing informally around a decorated tree on a table, devoid of robes of state, crowns, or scepters, appearing instead as a loving, idealized nuclear family enjoying a private moment. This visual endorsement lifted the veil on their private life and broadcast the German custom to the masses with the force of a viral sensation. For the British public, seeing their beloved queen and her handsome consort partaking in this ritual legitimized the Christmas tree instantly. It stripped away any lingering Puritan suspicion of paganism or foreignness and reframed the tree as a symbol of respectable modern domestic bliss. The image effectively communicated a powerful message: to be a good, loyal, and fashionable subject, one must celebrate Christmas, as the Queen did with a fir tree in the parlor surrounded by family signaling. A new era of British domesticity where the home was the center of the moral universe. The reaction to the 1848 publication was immediate, electrifying, and economically transformative, triggering a sociological phenomenon where the rising middle class sought to emulate the royal lifestyle with fervent dedication. In the strictly stratified society of Victorian Britain, where social mobility was often signaled by the adoption of correct etiquette and fashion, the keeping up with the neighbors mentality was a powerful driver of consumer behavior. And the Christmas tree became the ultimate status symbol of the season, almost overnight. The tree transformed from a quirky foreign oddity into an essential British fashion statement that no respectable household could be without. Nurserymen and market gardeners in Covent Garden, sensing the sudden shift in demand, began clearing out their stocks of firs and spruces to supply the London markets, creating a new seasonal industry. The wealthy and the aspiring middle class scrambled to procure trees, candles, and ornaments to replicate the scene from the Illustrated London News in their own drawing rooms. This was the moment the Christmas tree ceased to be German and became British. It was adopted with such enthusiasm that by the mid-1950s, it was already being spoken of as an ancient tradition by those who had only just discovered it, proving how quickly a royal endorsement could rewrite the cultural script and memories of a nation, embedding a new ritual so deeply that it felt like it had always been there. The Christmas tree's conquest did not stop at the shores of the British Isles. It crossed the Atlantic in 1850, facilitated by a fascinating act of historical editing, essentially a Victorian version of Photoshop that tailored the image for a new audience. The trend arrived in the United States when Godey's Ladies' Book, the most influential women's magazine in America at the time, and a Bible of domestic taste, republished the famous 1848 Illustrated London News engraving. However, the American editor Sarah Josepha Hale, a shrewd cultural arbiter who also campaigned for the creation of Thanksgiving, understood that a purely royalist image might not resonate with the Republican sensibilities of her American audience. Consequently, the engraving was altered, Prince Albert's distinctive mustache was removed to look more like a generic American father. Queen Victoria's tiara was erased to make her appear as a standard matron, and the boxes under the tree were removed to make the scene appear more egalitarian and less aristocratic. The caption was changed to present them as an ideal American family rather than the British monarchs. This calculated manipulation worked perfectly, allowing the Christmas tree to bypass anti-British sentiment and root itself deeply in American culture. By stripping the image of its specific royal context, Godey's lady's book universalized the symbol, solidifying the custom in the United States and paving the way for the tree to become as central to the American holiday as it was to the British, creating a transatlantic tradition that bridged the old world and the new. As the demand for Christmas trees exploded across Britain and America, a cottage industry in the small, secluded German village of Lauscha began to fundamentally alter the aesthetic of the holiday, shifting it from edible treats to permanent glitter. Lauscha, nestled in a valley in Thuringia, had long been a center for glassblowing, known for making marbles and scientific instruments. But in the late 1840s, artisans there began blowing large glass bubbles shaped like nuts and fruits to decorate trees, using a mixture of mercury or lead nitrate to swirl inside and create a silvered mirror-like finish. These kugels or baubles caught the light of the wax candles far more brilliantly than gingerbread or apples ever could, creating a dazzling, ethereal effect. The process was arduous and dangerous. Entire families would work around a central grease lamp, heating the glass tubes and blowing them into delicate molds with their own breath, often inhaling toxic fumes in cramped cottages to create beauty for the world's elite. The export of these delicate glass ornaments created a massive new industry, which was eventually capitalized upon by American entrepreneur F.W. Woolworth. In the 1880s, Woolworth reluctantly stocked a small supply of Lauscha ornaments in his variety stores, doubting they would sell to the practical American public. They sold out in days, proving him wrong and making his fortune. This marked the transition from homemade, perishable decorations to the manufactured, glittering commercial baubles that defined the late Victorian aesthetic, turning the dressing of the tree into a consumer ritual involving carefully stored and cherished glass treasures that were passed down through generations, creating a physical legacy of the holiday. Beyond the decorations and the commerce, the introduction of the Christmas tree catalyzed a profound sociological shift in the very purpose of the holiday, moving the focus from adult-centric feasting and drinking to a child-centric family festival. Prior to the Victorian era, gifts were typically exchanged on New Year's Day or Twelfth Night, January 5th, and Christmas was often a rowdy, community-based event focused on charity and social inversion, sometimes reminiscent of the Roman Saturnalia. The presence of the tree in the parlor acted as a magnet, drawing the celebration indoors and centering it on the wonder and delight of children. Victoria and Albert lavished gifts upon their children, placing them on the tables beneath the tree rather than in stockings, establishing the precedent that Christmas was a time for spoiling the young. This new focus on childhood innocence and the magic of Santa Claus, who was becoming popularized simultaneously through literature like A Christmas Carol and The Night Before Christmas, necessitated a staging area for this magic to occur. The tree provided that stage. It became the altar where the family gathered, where gifts appeared overnight as if by magic, and where the memories of childhood were manufactured and preserved. This restructuring of the holiday calendar effectively invented the modern anticipation of Christmas morning, making the tree the guardian of the season's secrets and the primary source of a child's winter joy, shifting the psychological weight of the holiday to the morning of the 25th. The tradition of the royal Christmas tree was so deeply forged in the bond between Victoria and Albert that it faced its greatest test following the prince consort's tragic and untimely death in 1861. Plunged into a deep, lifelong mourning that would define the rest of her reign, Queen Victoria retreated to Osborne's house on the Isle of Wight, the family home she and Albert had built together. Yet rather than abandoning the festivities that were so intrinsically linked to her late husband, she clung to them with a desperate, melancholy devotion, viewing them as a way to stay connected to him. The Christmas tree became a shrine to Albert's memory. The rituals were observed with rigid precision, exactly as he had established them, with trees placed in the same spots and decorated in the same manner. This obsession with preserving Albert's presence went to extraordinary lengths. In the famous Blue Room where he died, which was preserved as a mausoleum, servants were ordered to bring a fresh basin of hot water every single morning for decades, as if the prince were about to shave and his clothes were laid out daily on the bed. In this atmosphere of frozen time, the Christmas tree was not a sign of moving on, but an anchor to the past. The joy was muted, the atmosphere heavier. But the persistence of the tree at Osborne House ensured that the custom did not die with the man who championed it, by maintaining the tradition even in her widowhood. Victoria signaled to the nation that the Christmas tree was a permanent fixture of British life, not merely a passing fad of her happy years. It became a symbol of continuity and endurance, a bittersweet beacon that burned on through the Queen's long decades of black mourning dress, solidifying the tree as a symbol that transcends both joy and grief, representing a love that death could not extinguish. By the late 19th century, the Christmas tree had completed its descent from the royal palaces and the parlors of the wealthy elite to become a beloved fixture in the homes of the working class, achieving a true democratization of joy. Charitable organizations, hospitals, and workhouses began setting up large trees to cheer the poor and the sick, recognizing the morale-boosting power of the glittering evergreen in the darkest months of the year. The dinner for the poor often featured a large community tree, an attempt by Victorian philanthropists to bring a touch of spiritual light to the grime of the Industrial Revolution. Schools adopted the custom, and public squares began to host large community trees, creating shared spaces of celebration that were accessible to those who could not afford a tree of their own or the space to house it. This spread was aided by the falling cost of ornaments and the availability of cheaper, mass-produced toys and candles. The tree became a great leveler in society. Whether it was a magnificent spruce in a duke's hall reaching 30 feet high or a small, scrawny branch in a tenement, window adorned with paper scraps and home-whittled toys, the symbol remained the same. It represented a universal participation in the national holiday, a shared cultural language that connected the chimney sweep to the Queen, fulfilling Albert's vision of a tradition that brought warmth and gemütlichkeit to all levels of society, proving that the magic of the aristocracy alone, the evolution of the Christmas tree entered its next major phase with the advent of electricity, which solved the most dangerous aspect of the Victorian tradition, the open flame. For decades, the beauty of the tree had been married to the terrifying risk of fire. Victorian families lived in constant fear of the tree igniting the drapes or the voluminous crinolines of the women's dresses, with buckets of water and wet sand kept constantly nearby, and trees often only lit for 20 minutes at a time under strict supervision. There are countless tragic Victorian newspaper reports of festivities turning into infernos when a sleeve brushed a candle. However, in 1882, Edward Johnson, an associate of Thomas Edison, hand-wired 80 red, white, and blue electric bulbs around a revolving Christmas tree in his home in New York City, debuting the first set of electric Christmas lights to astonished reporters who described them as stars imprisoned in glass. As electrification spread and the technology became safer and more affordable in the early 20th century, the design of the tree changed physically. It's no longer restricted to tabletops to keep dangerous candles away from children and pets, or limited in size to what a table could. Support trees grew larger and taller, claiming their place on the floor and reaching for the ceiling. The electric lights allowed the tree to glow for hours or days on end, rather than just for brief, supervised moments, turning the Christmas tree into a permanent, glowing installation in the home throughout the entire season, fundamentally changing the atmosphere of the modern living room and extending the magic of the holiday into the night, creating a beacon of light visible from the street. Today, the Christmas tree stands as a ubiquitous global icon of the holiday season, a lasting testament to Prince Albert's influence and the romance of the Victorian era that reinvented how the world celebrates December 25th. Whether it is a towering plastic pine in a shopping mall in Tokyo, a spruce in Rockefeller Center, or a humble fir in a living room in London, every decorated tree is a direct lineage to that first spruce at Windsor Castle in 1841. It is a tradition that has survived wars, social upheavals, and the passage of nearly 2 centuries, evolving from a pagan symbol to a royal luxury, and finally to a universal emblem of hope and family. When we hang an ornament or string a light, we are unknowingly participating in a ritual designed by a lonely queen and a homesick prince who sought to build a fortress of warmth against the cold winter. The Christmas tree remains, at its core, a love letter from the past, a crystallized memory of Victorian domesticity that continues to illuminate our darkest nights, reminding us that even in the bleakest of winters, there is light, life, and the enduring power of tradition that binds generations together in a circle of warmth, ensuring that the legacy of that Victorian Christmas will never fade.
If you're ready for the next chapter of history, subscribe to the History Profile. Now, let's continue.